like mom submitted. No, I can't say strategic sales director. My name is Mary Oakley. Thanks for having me today. I want to say a special thanks to Eric for putting this together. It's been great. We're going to talk about. I'm going to try the clicker. He tested my. Let's So yeah, while we're getting that up, it's funny. Vince talked about Friday the 13th, and I didn't even think about it until I got in the car this morning. I was like, oh God, it is Friday the 13th, and I'm not really that superstitious, but about it. But the funny thing is, I'm with Red Hat, and Red Hat moved into the downtown tower probably about 18, I guess, 18. Our sales team is on the 13th. I'm like, what are you guys thinking? You know, I mean, I guess they think salespeople are superstitious, but it was kind of interesting. So we're on the 13th floor in the tower. All right, let's see if I can. So when you think about networking, who would agree? I used to say the same thing until my little brother shattered my. In the intro, I said I grew up in a small town called Fairmont, North Carolina. I mean, small. It was like 1,500 people when I grew up. My dad was the banker. My mom was a school teacher. I knew everybody in town, right? So I knew how to get stuff done. I could even get a little bit of trouble and not really be in trouble. You know, it was one of those work the system, right? So I, graduated very confident, went to Carolina, um, became very quickly a little fish in a very big pond, and that was really outside my comfort zone. But anyway, I had two goals when I went to Carolina. One, I wanted to get that degree, and two, I wanted to have fun. Well, I definitely had the fun. But I met a lot of people. In other words, I spent a lot of time in bars outside of the classroom. But I made a lot of friends and a lot of connections, right? So I tell that story because when I graduated, Ted Turner actually spoke at our graduation ceremony, and the economy sucked. It was awful. He was actually intoxicated during the speech. And he said, I really hate it for all you graduates because the economy really sucks right now. You're going to have a hard time getting a job. And I'm like, great. My little brother was there, and he just shook his head. And I'm like, he just gotten into Carolina, so he had 4 more years. I'm like, I might want to go back to school with him, right? This is not going to be fun. So my first job, I worked for a small company startup. It was called ACC. It was a clothing line. They were selling all conference. So they were selling all the different clothing for Duke, Carolina State, and all that kind of stuff. And it was a really cool job. And then about 2 months into that role, I got a call from a friend of mine that I'd met in a bar in Carolina. And he said, IBM is hiring inside salespeople, and I think you ought to, apply. I think you'd be great at it. So I was like, all right, let's go for this thing. So I applied for the job. I got it, and that was, I think, in '93, somewhere in there. And I called my brother and my parents and said, hey, I got this job at IBM. My brother goes, how the heck did you do this? The economy sucks, and you've got a job at IBM. I said, it's all in who you know, right? And going back to my little brother, being 4 years younger, he was always calling me when he was in trouble or if he needed help. And I was always bailing him out of everything, right? I'd help him. He's like, how do you get all this stuff? How do you do this? I'm like, it's all in who you know. I'd give him that little wink, very confident, very cocky. Looking back, I'm like, God, I can't believe I even did that stuff. But anyway, I was like, it's all in who you know. So fast forward a few years, and he got out of college. He got his first job, and there was something else came up, and I told him again, it's all in who you know. And he said, no, you're wrong. I'm like, he's never told me I'm wrong, right? He said, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And I thought about that thing for a minute, and I'm like, what? He's right. And I don't like saying that either. But he was so right that it's not who you know, it's who knows you. So I want you to kind of think about that when you're out networking, right? So just to kind of even back that up, I like to tell the story that that I moved to Dallas with IBM back in '96, and right when I moved, again, much smaller fish, another big pond, right? I'd never moved outside of North Carolina. And when I moved into this apartment, I moved next door to this lady that had just moved. Well, turns out she was from Charlotte. She was the director of marketing at the contacts all over Dallas, payments. And the reason I'm telling you that story it's all clean, right? But we sat with Willie for about 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. It was me, my friend, her 15-year-old son, and his girlfriend. It was, there was no smoke on the bus. It was all clean. But we sat with Willie for about 20, 30 minutes, and we just talked, right? I mean, I sat more awestruck than anything. But we were asking questions about his family at the time. I think he had a couple of young sons. He had had a couple of older daughters. But we just talked. And his family normally traveled with him, but this particular day they were not on the bus because they were actually from Texas, and I think they were visiting family. So I left that meeting, I'm like, that was the coolest thing ever. But I can technically say that I know Willie, right? I know Willie Nelson. So, but if I think about that and going back to the who you know, could I call Willie today and get anything from Willie? Could I get backstage passes? Could I do anything? He wouldn't remember that from anything, and probably not because he was smoking anything or anything else, but he wouldn't remember that interaction. So I really just kind of hit home about that. So it really is more who knows you. About LinkedIn, this is one that's crazy. Break in to these accounts, and I'm like, all right, you have certain tools to go do it, but I'll always go research the account, see what contacts are in that account that might be connected to a Red Hat executive. I find a Red Hat executive, I send this executive an email and say, hey, I'm trying to do whatever. I see you're connected to. And I always get the same response. Well, I would say 90% of the time I get the same response back. Yeah, I'm connected to him. I met him on a panel, but I don't really know him, so I can't really help you. I'm like, well, what? So go back to the drawing board. But it's just one of those things about, yeah, it's connected, but really to get anything out of the connections or the contacts, you really need to have a connection, right? So we're going to talk about how to really get those connections, and then really this is the right chart, right? The more connections you have, the more things you can do. And that's not just, I don't want you to think about just professional, but think about personal as well, right? So we're going to talk about that. But really the more things you can do in life in general. When you think about networking, it's complex. I'm not sure if this thing. Your networking is not just LinkedIn, or it's not just coming. It's about everything you do. Network all the time, right? And you're always shaking hands, you're meeting. About the connections versus the contacts, and what is it? And I'm going to give you an example of Vince. Vince and I first met, it was over, I think, an email. I got a call from a lady at Red Hat, said Vince had reached out, and we were hey, I have this problem, can I, run this by you, whatever. A connection is a relationship. That ability to call and get things done. Person. So there's so many tools. Some of these other things. I know my things, but if you think about the tools versus in person, think much more things you get done once you actually meet somebody in person. So when Vince and I were exchanging emails or even talking on the phone, there was that connection. But after we had lunch, it was on a different level, right? I mean, it was a much more personal, and I was more comfortable reaching out and just having that conversation. Just changed once you have that in person. So my only thing is don't sit behind the tools or the phone or the computer. Get out and invite people to lunch, invite people to dinner, a drink, breakfast, a walk, right? I mean, if it's somebody in your building, if somebody you work with, hey, let's walk the floor. Just do things in person versus just sitting behind the technology. Makes a big difference. You want me to do the microphone? Am I not loud enough? I feel like I'm so loud. I hate microphones. Okay, sorry. All right, the recorder. So internal versus external, and this is one of the things that it always surprises me every year. So, like for example, this year I have 2 new sales people on my team, and these are senior salespeople, right? They've been in the industry for a while. and they are great at connecting with their customers. I mean, they know how to sell, ice to the Eskimo, right? So, but one thing that always shocks me is they do not work the internal contacts inside the company. They're calling me saying, hey, I need help with this contract and legal. They don't know who the lawyers are that touch the contracts, right? They need operations. They need help with whatever, marketing. And it's just as important when you're working in a company to know the people that help you get your stuff done than it is going to your customer, right? You will get so much more done and feel so much better about the whole transaction if you work with people inside your company as well as work inside your company as well as you work in your networking outside your company. So, and I truly believe that. And also I'll hit on this later, but thank those people that are helping you get your job done, right? There's so much more that goes along with that, but be very thankful to the internal contacts that you have and connections that you have. I need to say connections that you have versus contacts, but make them connections inside your company. So don't just focus on the external. And then last is, everybody thinks professional and personal. I like to blend these two together, and I'm going to tell this is a personal story so before I moved to Dallas, I worked on the sales floor, and there were people that I knew, but I didn't really have a connection to. Moved to Dallas, came back to Raleigh. I actually went from Dallas to Atlanta and then back to Raleigh. So I kind of came back to a sales team that I'd kind of once worked with but didn't know very well. And this lady reached out, and she said, hey, I'm really thinking about going to outside sales. Would you mind having lunch with me and just kind of taking me through what it was like to move, what it was like to move from inside sales to outside sales? And I was like, sure. So we went to lunch, and we hit it off immediately, and we became good friends. 2 or 3 months later, she introduced me to her cousin, who I'm now married to today and have 2 kids with. So it went from, a professional relationship to a personal to now kind of somewhat family, right? Married into it. But it was just because I was open, and I didn't go into that lunch. I wasn't really going into that lunch to get anything from it. I went to go help her because she reached out to me and had some questions, just wanted my opinion on the move, right? So it's how you go into things as well. Don't go into it looking for, like, what can I get out of it? Look into it, what you can do for other people, and it will come back. And it's all about your brand. This is something I'm pretty passionate about, is how you are showing up. And in all these things, think about how you're showing up to the other people, right? One of the things I tell my my boys, and they're 15 and 14, so just now starting to get on the social media. They still don't have Facebook. I do have Instagram. I used to think Instagram was innocent, but it's not quite as innocent as I thought. But it's, it's a digital footprint, right? Whatever you post and whatever you share is going to stay with you forever. So make sure you know what you're posting today, because, opinions change, right? I know I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, but if I had posted something 10 years ago, it's still there. I'm like, oh, God, how do I erase that, right? But it's still there. So just be careful about what you post. And Vince and I were talking at lunch that day, and I said, my rule of thumb is I don't go any LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. I don't go political, and I don't go religion, because you never know what you're reaching out to somebody and they go research you, that comes up. You might just already turn somebody off just because of something you posted that wasn't even that intentional, right? So just think about your brand. Another example of that is my son went to football camp last year, and one of the coaches we got to see, and it was actually Nick Saban was speaking, and he said, guys, just remember, everything you do and everything you say will come back to haunt you when it's posted. He said, and recruiters, he said, everyone else looks up this stuff, and it can keep you from getting the job or a member on the team or whatever. He's just thinking about everything you do is your brand. And that really stuck with me, because it's not just about sports. That's life, right? So that's one thing we have to just kind of think about. So everything's all about your brand. Are we on time? So just really quick in summarizing, keys to building stronger connections and networks. One is really assess, and it kind of goes back, just assess different things, right? Assess how you're showing up when you go out to meet new people. Assess what your network, where you find holes in whether it's your personal network, your professional network, whatever. Figure out where you need help and what you need to get your job done or to make you feel happy or whatever it is. Just figure out, what is it that I need, and then build a plan to go do that, right? I used to do this a lot better than I do now. I have to sometimes make myself say, all right, what do I need to go focus on right now, and who can I reach out to help build and fill that hole? Be PAT. And what is PAT? In building connections, it's really about, the P is patient. You have to be patient. Connections don't happen overnight, right? Don't go in there and try to, it's like the speed dating. It's not, you build relationships and connections over a period of time, and it takes work. It's not going to go meet somebody, shake somebody's hand, and talk to them for 15 minutes and think you have connection. You have to kind of work at that and invest in it, right? So just be patient. Don't try to rush it. A is authentic, and this is really big for me too. Is kind of don't go in and put up, somebody that you're not. Be authentic. Be genuine when you go out to meet somebody. Come into it with the right attitude. My son says, does that mean attitude? I'm like, yeah, it can mean attitude, but it really means be authentic when you go out and try to build these relationships and connections. The first T is to be trustworthy. So if you're out having a conversation or whatever, don't go share. Someone shares something with you. Don't go out and share that and say, oh, I did share with Willie Nelson, but I don't want to go and say, hey, I met with Willie Nelson or whatever. And but keep that to yourself unless they say it's okay to share. And then the other thing, as far as trustworthy, is if you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say you're going to do something by a certain amount of time, do that, right? That actually helps build your brand. If they can know they can depend on you, that is huge. Because there's some people, we assume that everybody's going to do everything they say they're going to do. They don't. And then you disappoint people. They remember that, right? They also remember when you do what you say you're going to do and whether you're dependable. So you're building that brand. And the last, I hit on this earlier, the other T is thankful. Be thankful in whatever you do. Whenever someone's helping you, make sure you send that note, that thank you note. If you're working with somebody, send a note to their boss and say, thank you, they've done a great job. You have no idea what that means to people when you're trying to build those relationships and those connections, right? So being thankful I think is key. Listen actively. Now this is another, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I used to work for a boss who, if he texted me or called me, if I didn't answer, or if I didn't text back within like 5 minutes, it was going to be hell to pay a little bit later, right? So, and I was always on edge. I was like, oh my God, I got to make sure I keep my phone. And this was just actually 4 or 5 years ago. I was working with a team, and I had 2 managers that I would do one-on-ones with every month. And so we'd go in and we'd just have 30 minutes. We'd go get coffee and say, hey, how are things going? Just touch base. And I always say, can you give me any feedback? Well, and I said, I want you guys to be transparent, because I know Brandon mentioned earlier about transparency. I'm huge on transparency. I said, give me some, feedback. What can I do differently? And this one gentleman, he goes, well, he said, one of the things, and I know, and I had sent a note out earlier about being in the moment, that, everybody needs to be in the moment. If you're on a sales call, you need to make sure you're listening to your customer. He said, well, you send that email about being in the moment. He said, when we're in these one-on-ones, sometimes you're checking your phone or you tell me to hold on. And I'm like, God, he's right. I would have my phone on the desk, and I had the screen up, and part of it was just because my boss, I'm scared that he's going to text me if I don't respond, right? But anyway, he told me, and we had a good connection, we were a good rapport, and he's like, he said, I understand that you're doing that because I know the situation you're in. He said, if you're meeting with a rep and you're doing that, they don't know that you have a boss that wants you to respond within 5 minutes. How are you think about how you're showing up? And I was like, you know what, you're right. So now I leave the phone in my purse or on the floor or on the ground. I don't even put it on the table when I'm talking to somebody, right? And if there is something I have to have, like if my kid's homesick, look, I've got a sick kid at home. I just want to keep my phone here just in case I get a phone call. But, those, I don't try and do that. So now my rule is I'm trying to be in the moment, listen actively, engaging in the conversation. And again, that's just as much for me, but it makes the other person feel that much better, right? So listen actively. Follow up and reach out. Whenever you have an interaction, make sure you send a follow-up email to say thank them for their time, whether you just say enjoy the conversation, bring back a point that you discussed or whatever, but make sure you follow up. But don't let that be the last thing you do. If you can, put something in your calendar and say, hey, reach back out to, for example, Vince in 30, 45 days just to touch base, see how, if he had, if I wasn't here, I'd send it to Vince and say, hey, how did the T-Rex conference go? Or just something, just to make sure they're top of mind, right? But that's continuous. That's not a one and done. That is a continuous thing you need to do. And then last, if you go into this with the attitude of helping others, and I said this really should be the first thing you do, but I just want to kind of close on it. If you go in it with helping others, it's actually going to come back, right? It will come back to you. So don't go into a networking event saying, oh, what can I get out of this? Go into it like, what can you do to help the other people get ahead? And in closing, if you think about, there's a Zig Ziglar quote, and he says, you will get everything in life that you want if you take the time to help others get what they want, right? And I truly believe that. So I think we've got time for questions.
So anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you have an iPhone, but I've done FaceTime before. There's Blue Jeans, there's WebEx. There's a lot of tools out there now that allow you to have that face-to-face interactions. I would definitely recommend, and people understand it, right? Because it's very hard when in an email or even in a phone call to see expressions, to see kind of find out if they're smiling when they're saying something, or if they're like got the frown, or also if they're engaged. So I think that's a great question. So it's FaceTime or Blue Jeans. We actually use Blue Jeans within Red Hat. So I used to hate it, but now I kind of know how to turn my screen to kind of angle the. That's why I hate this camera.
Other questions?
I think you just have to say that, well, you can send me one and say how great my presentation was. I'm just kidding. I think it's more just introducing yourself and just say if you know what you were there and then what you took out of it would be a great thing to do, and just say, do you mind if I reach out and kind of touch base, or just say, I mean, be transparent. If you want something out of it or just to get the more knowledge or meet for coffee, I would just say that, and just, yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't, you know, it kind of goes back to being, I guess, the authentic piece, right? But you don't really have a connection yet, so you'd like to make a connection or just learn more from whomever. Yep. Yeah, and that is hard. Like in a cold call, it is very hard to go do, right? So that's where it's, if you can find that warm connection or that warm body to help introduce you, that actually makes it a lot easier. It's very hard, and I think John Mike can help us out on this a little bit later. Yes. Yeah. So that's an excellent question, and this is one of these where I can. Oh, how do you? All right. What was the question? I know. So being helpful versus, I mean, and not doing so much where you're being taken advantage of. And I think this might be kind of a question, but sometimes it can be very, depending on your role and kind of what you have going on, to say yes and to accept every single request that's out there. It's very hard. Sometimes I've burned myself out because I'm trying to do something for everyone that reaches out, or in my network, trying to do something when they need it. It is okay to say no, or I'm super busy right now, or I've got a lot going on, I can't do this right now. It is okay to say no and not to, but I do try to respond, and I am not good at this. I mean, I get so many emails a day that if I'll do it, and I've gotten to work on the system, but responding right away and say, hey, I'm really slammed right now, let me get back to you, and if you don't hear from me in a week, reach back out, right? I will say that, but it's okay to say no and not accept every single request for something if you've got too much going on. Say, don't take it personal. Yes. How can you help me? Give me a bunch of likes on this, whatever this, what is the app? I tried to download the app, and I don't know my Apple ID. Password. So I've got to go do this thing. When I get done, I'm going to do my Apple ID password.
Just use hashtag T-Rex18 and then at Mary Oakley. Is it Mary Oakley?
Mary Oakley, yes. Yeah. Come on, Vince. We've had lunch.
Look, that was your Twitter symbol. Kidding. Somebody might have stolen it.
I'm kidding, yeah.
You still got a couple minutes. Any questions? Yeah, there you go.
In a cold call? Well, hopefully I've done my research, and so one, I compliment them on whatever I've seen, if they've done a talk or if they've done something, and then it really depends on the background, right? I mean, what role they're in, and I just try to make something custom from that. I mean, so it's kind of hard to. I don't know if I have a favorite question. It just really depends on the role, the person, and the situation. But I do have some canned letters I go back to and read every now and then and say, okay, what can I go do? What can I say? Yes. Yeah. So in the Willie, so this goes back to, so it was my friend, she was the marketing director for the Texas Motor Speedway, and she was the one that had all the contacts. So I was just a tag along for that. So at the end of the concert, because everyone in Dallas was wooing her, trying to get her to, so they could be a part of the Texas Motor Speedway or get tickets or whatever, because this was the first year it was being built. So I mean, it was only because I was with her, right? So the sponsor of the concert or whatever said, "Hey, do you guys want to come back and meet Willie?" And we're like, "Absolutely." So that's all that was. It wasn't because Willie said yes. It was more that whoever was paying for that event, I mean, it was on. But we did get to go on his bus. It was kind of cool.
I got one question for you. Do you make it a goal to network on a weekly, daily basis? Do you?
No.
No.
So I personally, I do not like going to networking events. I mean, I think that there's a purpose, and that's, it's another thing is.
Well, sorry to bring you here then.
No. Like if I go in with what it is, but it's like if it's just a networking event, and I think this is great because it's a revenue exchange, right? There's a purpose in it, so I do like that. But I don't do it weekly. I do try to every week reach out to people in my contacts and connection base just to keep that going. I do that. But to go out and do like a networking event every week, no, I do not do that.
Thanks to Mary.
Thank
Great
you.
job, Mary.
Thank you.